September 11th, 1970. 16 American Green Berets inserted into Laos expecting light resistance, maybe 200 enemy troops. But here's what they didn't know. They just landed in the middle of a 600-man North Vietnamese division base. Within 4 hours, every single American was wounded. What happened next was 4 straight days of nonstop combat that military doctrine says should have been impossible to survive. If you want to see how these 16 men fought their way out against 600 and the 3 other MACV SOG operations that were even more impossible, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube this is the kind of history that deserves to be seen. Back to September 11th, 1970. Captain Jean McCarley jumped from a Huey helicopter into waist-high grass in southeastern Laos. 29 years old. Fort Bragg Special Forces. 2 combat tours already completed. The helicopter's rotor wash flattened the elephant grass around him. The Huey lifted. The sound faded. Silence settled over the jungle. McCarley carried an M16 rifle, 12 magazines, for fragmentation grenades, 2 smoke grenades, 1 survival radio. His rucksack weighed 43 pounds. The air temperature was 96 degrees. Humidity somewhere near 100%. Sweat soaked through his uniform before the helicopter disappeared over the ridgeline. 15 other Americans hit the ground with him. Staff Sergeant Gary Mike Rose from Watertown, New York, the medic. Sergeant First Class Melvin Hill from Detroit, Michigan. Specialist 4th Class Jose Astorga from Sacramento, California. 14 more whose names would be written into classified after-action reports that would not be declassified for 23 years. Behind them, 120 Montagnard fighters deployed from 5 additional Huey helicopters. Indigenous soldiers from the mountain tribes of Vietnam. Men who had fought alongside Americans since 1961. Men who knew the jungle, knew the North Vietnamese, and knew that this mission felt wrong from the beginning. The intelligence briefing at Command and Control Central had been clean. Simple. The National Security Agency reported enemy radio traffic suggesting 200 North Vietnamese Army soldiers in the operational area. Maybe 400 at most. Light resistance. The mission objective, reconnaissance and diversion. Move north from the landing zone. Establish ambush positions along known enemy trails. Gather intelligence on troop movements. Create noise and confusion to support a larger Central Intelligence Agency operation 40 kilometers west on the Bolovens Plateau. Standard work for a hatchet force. But the intelligence was catastrophically wrong. What McCarley had just inserted into was not a light enemy presence. Not 200 soldiers. Not even 400. His B Company, Hatchet Force, had landed directly in the operational security perimeter of the North Vietnamese Army's 2nd Regiment headquarters. Approximately 600 enemy soldiers. Artillery positions. Command bunkers. Supply depots. Organized defensive fighting positions with interlocking fields of fire. A division-level base area that American intelligence had completely failed to identify. Within 4 hours, every American on the ground would be bleeding. The Hatchet Force moved north from the landing zone. McCarley took point with the 1st platoon. The Montagnard fighters spread out in a loose tactical formation. The jungle canopy was thick, triple canopy in places. Sunlight filtered through in scattered beams. Visibility dropped to maybe 30 meters. They found the trail at 11:43. A footpath, well used. Fresh boot prints in the mud. The prints were deep, recent, multiple soldiers. Moving south toward the landing zone. McCarley signaled halt. The column froze. He studied the trail. The math was immediate and ugly. Fresh tracks meant enemy patrols were active. Active patrols meant the North Vietnamese new American forces had inserted. Knew and were responding. He keyed his radio. Covey, this is Hatchet Force Actual. We have fresh enemy sign. Multiple personnel. Request immediate reconnaissance overflight. The forward air controller, call sign Covey, orbited somewhere overhead in an O2 Skymaster observation aircraft. The fax voice crackled back through the handset. Roger, Hatchet Force. Be advised, we're observing what appears to be significant enemy movement approximately 500 meters north of your position. Recommend you hold position and prepare for contact. 500 meters. Less than 10 minutes at patrol speed. McCarley made the decision. 1st platoon, establish ambush positions. 2nd and 3rd platoons, security perimeter. Prepare for contact. The Americans moved. Fast. Professional. They had done this before. The Montagnards faded into the jungle, selecting firing positions with natural cover. Gary Mike Rose, the medic, positioned himself centrally where he could reach any element quickly. Everyone checked ammunition. Magazines seated. Safeties off. Eyes scanning the northern approach. At 12:13, the North Vietnamese walked into the kill zone. 6 soldiers, walking south on the trail, wearing pith helmets and chest rigs loaded with ammunition pouches, carrying AK-47 rifles, moving with the casual confidence of men who believed they controlled the terrain. The lead NVA soldier was perhaps 20 feet from the first American position when McCarley detonated the ambush. M16 fire ripped through the jungle. 3 enemy soldiers dropped immediately. The other 3 scattered, returning fire wildly, attempting to locate the American positions. A Montagnard fighter threw a fragmentation grenade. The explosion was sharp and close. 1 more enemy soldier went down. The remaining 2 retreated north, firing short bursts to cover their withdrawal. 15 seconds. 6 enemy soldiers engaged. For confirmed kills, 2 escaped, and those 2 survivors would bring hell down on B Company. The North Vietnamese response was immediate and organized. This was not a random patrol stumbling into American forces. This was a well-trained regiment defending its headquarters area. Within 20 minutes of the first contact, automatic weapons fire began impacting the American positions from multiple directions. RPK light machine guns, RPD medium machine guns, the distinctive crack of AK-47 rifles, the heavier thump of SKS carbines, and then the rocket-propelled grenades started arriving. The first RPG impacted 30 meters from McCarley's position. The explosion was massive. Dirt and vegetation erupted skyward. Shrapnel whined through the trees. A Montagnard fighter screamed. Gary Mike Rose was already moving toward the sound. The wounded fighter had taken shrapnel to the left leg. 3 separate wounds. Rose dropped beside him, pulling his medical kit. He cut the trouser leg away. The wounds were deep but not arterial. Rose applied pressure bandages, talking constantly in broken Vietnamese mixed with English. "You're okay. You're good. Stay down. Keep pressure on it." More RPGs impacted. The North Vietnamese were bracketing the American position, walking their fire across the defensive perimeter to identify exact locations. Standard Soviet doctrine: suppress with machine gun fire. Fix the enemy position with RPG strikes. Assault with infantry once the enemy is pinned. McCarley understood the tactical situation immediately. The NVA were not retreating. They were not evading. They were attacking, coordinating, maneuvering. This was a prepared enemy fighting from positions they knew, using terrain they controlled, with reinforcements available. The first American was hit at 13:21. Sergeant Melvin Hill took an AK-47 round through his right shoulder. The bullet entered from the front, traveled through muscle tissue, and exited cleanly through the back. Hill went down hard, stayed down for maybe 3 seconds, then pushed himself upright, shifted his M16 to his left hand, and continued firing. Rose reached him within 90 seconds. "Let me see it. I'm fine. Get the yards." Hill meant the Montagnards. 3 more indigenous fighters were down with shrapnel wounds. "Shut up and let me work." Rose cut Hill's uniform away. The entry wound was clean. The exit wound was larger but manageable. Rose packed both wounds with gauze, applied pressure bandages, and injected morphine. "You're going out on the first bird." Like hell. But there would be no first bird. Not yet. Not while the North Vietnamese maintained concentrated fire on the position. Medevac helicopters could not descend into this level of enemy contact. The extraction would have to wait until air support could suppress the enemy positions. McCarley keyed the radio. "Covey, this is Hatchet Force Actual. We are in heavy contact. Multiple casualties. Request immediate close air support. Danger close authorized." Danger close. Military terminology meaning friendly forces are within 600 meters of the target. Close enough that American bombs and cannon fire could kill Americans as easily as enemy soldiers. But without air support, the North Vietnamese would overrun the position within hours. Covey's response was immediate. "Roger, Hatchet Force. Fast movers inbound. ETA 12 minutes. Mark your position with smoke." 12 minutes. 720 seconds. An eternity under concentrated fire. The A-1 Sky Raiders came in low and fast at 13:36. Korean war-era aircraft. Propeller-driven. Slow compared to jets, but capable of carrying extraordinary ordnance loads and loitering over targets for extended periods. Each Sky Raider carried 4 20mm cannons, 7 hardpoints for bombs and rockets, and pilots who understood close air support doctrine better than any jet jockey. McCarley popped purple smoke. The canister hissed, and thick violet smoke billowed upward through the jungle canopy. Covey hatchet force. Purple smoke is friendly position. Enemy positions are north, northwest, and northeast of smoke. 50 to 100 meters. The first Sky Raider rolled in. The pilot's voice came through the radio, calm and professional. I have purple smoke. Confirm you want ordnance north of smoke, 50 meters. Affirmative. Danger close. We're taking heavy fire. The Sky Raider's cannons opened first. 20mm rounds chewed through the jungle canopy. The sound was overwhelming, a sustained roar that drowned out everything else. Trees exploded. Vegetation shredded. The North Vietnamese machine gun fire slackened as enemy soldiers dove for cover. Then the bombs. 500-pound general-purpose bombs dropped from the Sky Raider's hardpoints. The first bomb impacted 80 meters north of the American position. The explosion was apocalyptic. A wall of pressure slammed through the jungle. Dirt and debris rained down. The concussion wave hit like a physical blow. A second Sky Raider rolled in. More cannon fire. More bombs. The jungle north of B Company's position became a killing zone. Trees burning. Craters smoking. The North Vietnamese fire stopped completely for nearly 3 minutes. McCarley used the pause. All elements, consolidate positions. Casualty report. Prepare to move. The count came back. 4 Americans wounded. 11 Montagnard fighters wounded. 0 killed so far. But the ammunition expenditure was heavy. Each American had fired at least 4 magazines. Some had fired 6. The Montagnards were running through ammunition even faster. And the North Vietnamese were not retreating. They were repositioning, maneuvering around the airstrikes, preparing for another assault. The second attack came at 1441. This time the enemy came from the east. A coordinated assault. Perhaps 40 NVA soldiers moving through the jungle in fire teams, using cover and concealment, advancing under covering fire from machine gun positions further back. The Americans engaged. M16 fire met AK-47 fire at ranges under 50 meters. Grenades flew in both directions. The noise was constant and overwhelming. Nobody shouted orders. Training took over. Muscle memory. Point. Shoot. Reload. Shoot. Another American went down. Specialist Jose Astorga took an AK round through his left thigh. The bullet shattered his femur. He screamed. Dropped. His M16 clattered away. Rose was there within seconds. The wound was catastrophic. Bone fragments visible through torn muscle tissue. Arterial bleeding. Rose applied a tourniquet above the wound. Tightened it until the bleeding stopped. Injected 2 morphine syrettes. You're okay. You're going home. Stay with me. Astorga's eyes rolled back. Shock was setting in. Rose elevated the leg, wrapped the wound with pressure bandages, and signaled for 2 Montagnards to carry Astorga to the center of the defensive perimeter where casualties were being consolidated. The North Vietnamese assault broke against the American defensive fire and the Montagnard positions. After 8 minutes of sustained combat, the enemy withdrew, left their dead, pulled back to regroup. But they would be back. McCarley checked his watch. 14:53. They had been on the ground for 5 hours and 36 minutes. Every American was wounded now. Some lightly, shrapnel nicks, grazing rounds. Others seriously. The casualty count among the Montagnards was approaching 20. And extraction was impossible. Every time Covey tried to bring helicopters toward the area, enemy anti-aircraft fire drove them off. The North Vietnamese had positioned machine guns specifically to interdict helicopter approaches. Until those positions could be suppressed or destroyed, no aircraft could land. The sun dropped toward the horizon. Darkness would come around 1900 hours, and night would bring a whole new level of danger. The Spectre gunship arrived at 1947, an AC-130 cargo aircraft modified into a flying weapons platform. 4 20mm Vulcan cannons, 4 7.62mm miniguns, 2 40mm Bofors cannons, all mounted to fire from the left side of the aircraft as it orbited the target in a left-hand banking turn. The Spectre crew used infrared sensors and low-light television to identify targets invisible to the ground forces. Through those sensors, the jungle came alive. Heat signatures. Movement. The North Vietnamese soldiers maneuvering in the darkness showed as bright spots against the cool jungle background. The miniguns opened first. 6,000 rounds per minute per gun. The sound from the ground was like tearing fabric, a sustained ripping noise that went on and on. Red tracers poured down from the circling aircraft. Every fifth round was a tracer, which meant for every visible red streak, for invisible bullets accompanied it. The jungle erupted. North Vietnamese soldiers caught in the open were shredded. Soldiers in fighting positions were suppressed, pinned, unable to move without being detected and engaged. The Spectre orbited for 90 minutes, firing nearly 20,000 rounds, converting the area around B Company's defensive position into a no-man's land where movement meant death. But the Spectre had to refuel eventually. When it departed at 21:30, the North Vietnamese moved again. This time they tried infiltration. Small teams, 2 or 3 soldiers, moving slowly through the darkness, attempting to get close enough to throw grenades into the American positions or identify weak points in the defensive perimeter. The Americans had prepared Claymore mines positioned around the perimeter. Each Claymore held 700 steel ball bearings behind a curved plastic explosive charge. Detonated, the mine would send those ball bearings outward in a 60-degree arc at 4,000 feet per second. Anything within 50 meters was dead. At 22:18, a Montagnard security guard heard movement. He whispered the alert. McCarley nodded, waited, listened. There, the sound of vegetation being pushed aside. Footsteps. Quiet. Careful. Close. McCarley detonated the Claymore. The explosion was flat and sharp. The sound of ball bearings shredding jungle was like hail hitting a tin roof. Screams followed immediately. North Vietnamese soldiers hit by the blast. Some killed instantly, others wounded and crying out in the darkness. The NVA responded with rifle fire, shooting blindly toward the sound of the explosion. Bullets cracked overhead. The Americans stayed low, returned fire. Muzzle flashes marked enemy positions and drew counterfire. This continued through the night. Probes. Explosions. Firefights lasting 3 or 4 minutes, then falling silent. The North Vietnamese testing the defenses. The Americans conserving ammunition and waiting for dawn. Gary Mike Rose moved constantly through the darkness, checking casualties, rebandaging wounds, administering morphine, whispering encouragement. 2 Montagnard fighters had died during the night from their wounds. Rose covered their faces with ponchos and moved on to the living. Dawn on September 12th brought no relief. Visibility improved. The heat built. The North Vietnamese attacks resumed with increased intensity. The NVA had brought in reinforcements during the night. Intelligence estimates would later suggest that additional company-sized elements, perhaps 150 more soldiers, had moved into the area, bringing the total enemy force to somewhere between 600 and 750 troops, against 136 Americans and Montagnards still capable of fighting. The ammunition situation was becoming critical. Each American had started with 12 M16 magazines, 30 rounds per magazine, 360 rounds total. By dawn on day 2, most Americans were down to 4 magazines or fewer. The Montagnards were in worse shape. Some had only 2 magazines remaining. McCarley radioed for resupply. Covey, Hatchet Force Actual. We need ammunition resupply. Critical shortage. Also require medevac for urgent casualties. Roger, Hatchet Force. Resupply birds inbound. ETA 20 minutes. Be advised enemy anti-aircraft fire is heavy. Pilots will need smoke for landing zone identification. At 0730, the CH-47 Chinook helicopter appeared. A massive twin-rotor cargo helicopter capable of carrying tremendous loads. The Chinook came in fast and low, the door gunners already firing their M60 machine guns to suppress enemy positions around the potential landing zone. McCarley popped green smoke. The Chinook pilot saw it, began his approach. The helicopter descended through the canopy. 50 feet, 40 feet, 30 feet. The North Vietnamese opened fire with everything. Machine guns, rifles, RPGs. Tracer rounds converged on the helicopter from multiple directions. An RPG impacted the helicopter's tail section. The explosion was visible even through the jungle canopy. Metal fragments spun away from the aircraft. The pilot aborted, pulled maximum power. The Chinook clawed skyward, trailing smoke from the damaged tail, the door gunners still firing. The helicopter climbed through the canopy and disappeared. Hatchet force, Covey. That bird is damaged. Emergency landing 5 clicks east. We're sending another bird. But no pilot would risk descending into that level of anti-aircraft fire. Not without massive suppression of enemy positions first. More Sky Raiders arrived. More bombs. More cannon fire. The air support had become constant. Aircraft stacked overhead waiting their turn to roll in. Pilots coordinating with Covey. Bombs falling every 10 to 15 minutes. The sustained aerial bombardment was the only thing preventing the North Vietnamese from overrunning the position entirely. But air support could not solve the fundamental problem. B Company was surrounded, outnumbered, running out of ammunition, and extraction remained impossible as long as enemy anti-aircraft positions controlled the helicopter approaches. At 11:21, the Japanese sniper found Sergeant Melvin Hill. Hill had been moving between positions, redistributing ammunition from wounded soldiers who could no longer fight to soldiers still capable of engaging the enemy. A single AK-47 round struck him in the chest. Center mass. The round penetrated his body armor, Vietnamese issue armor that was not designed to stop rifle rounds at close range. Hill collapsed. Rose reached him within 30 seconds. Rolled him over. The wound was sucking. A hole in the chest wall allowing air into the pleural cavity. Hill's lung was collapsing. Rose immediately covered the wound with a plastic wrapper from a bandage package, taped 3 sides down to create a one-way valve, and elevated Hill's head to help him breathe. Stay with me, Mel. You're okay. Medevac is coming. But Medevac was not coming. Not yet. Hill's breathing was labored. Shallow. His skin was pale and clammy. Shock. Rose started in 4. Pushed fluids. Injected morphine. Monitored vitals. Hill was dying slowly. Without surgical intervention, without getting him to a field hospital, he would not survive more than a few hours. McCarley made the decision. They had to move. Find a better defensive position. Find an extraction landing zone that the helicopters could reach. Staying in place meant death for the wounded and eventual annihilation for everyone. At 1300 hours, B Company began moving south. Moving a unit in contact with the enemy is one of the most dangerous tactical maneuvers in infantry doctrine. The unit has to maintain defensive security while physically displacing. Wounded have to be carried. Ammunition has to be redistributed. Soldiers have to move while under fire. The Montagnards constructed litters from bamboo poles and ponchos. For fighters to each litter. The most seriously wounded, including Hill and Astorga, were loaded onto the improvised stretchers. The formation reorganized. Security elements front and rear. The main body carrying wounded and equipment in the center. They moved perhaps 300 meters in the first hour. The North Vietnamese followed, harassing fire from the flanks. Occasional probes testing the defensive perimeter. The NVA were not attempting to overwhelm the American force now. They were bleeding it. Attrition warfare. Let the Americans exhaust themselves carrying wounded. Let them run out of ammunition. Let the jungle and the heat and the wounds take their toll. By 1500 hours, 2 more Americans were hit. Grazing wounds. Shrapnel. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but enough to reduce combat effectiveness. Every wound mattered now. Every casualty reduced the number of rifles available to defend the perimeter. The jungle was thick. Movement through dense vegetation while carrying litters required constant cutting with machetes. Vines. Thorns. Bamboo thickets. The Montagnards worked the machetes while the Americans provided security. Progress was agonizingly slow. At 1623, they found a clearing. Not large. Maybe 40 meters across. Enough for a single helicopter. Maybe 2 if the pilots were willing to crowd the landing zone. McCarley called it in. Covey, Hatchet Force. We have a possible LZ. Grid coordinates 784932. Request immediate medevac for urgent casualties. Roger, Hatchet Force. Medevac bird is airborne. ETA 15 minutes. Be advised enemy anti-aircraft fire is still active. You need to suppress those positions before the bird can land. Suppress the positions. With what? B Company's ammunition was nearly exhausted. Most Americans were down to 2 magazines. Some had only 1. The Sky Raiders came back. This time they brought napalm. Napalm, naphthenic acid and palmitic acid mixed with gasoline to create an incendiary gel that stuck to everything it touched and burned at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. The Skyraider pilot, callsign Snoopy, made his approach at treetop level. So low the Americans could hear the metallic click of the napalm canisters releasing from the hardpoints. The canisters tumbled end over end, hit the jungle canopy 70 meters from the American position, burst. Liquid fire spread across the jungle in a rolling wave. Trees ignited. Vegetation vaporized. The heat was intense even at 70 meters. The roar of the flames was like a freight train. And then the screaming started. North Vietnamese soldiers caught in the napalm strike. Men burning alive. The sound was inhuman. Primal. It went on for nearly 30 seconds before fading. The medevac helicopter, a Marine Corps CH-53 heavy-lift helicopter, descended toward the clearing at 1641. The pilots could see the burning jungle, could hear the small arms fire still impacting around the landing zone. But the wounded needed extraction. The helicopter came in anyway. The CH-53 flared hard. The massive rotor wash flattened the grass. The helicopter touched down. The crew chief waved frantically from the open ramp. The Americans moved. Fast. The litter teams ran toward the helicopter. Hill. Astorga. For more critically wounded Montagnards. They loaded them aboard. The crew chief helped pull the litters into the cargo bay. An RPG streaked out of the jungle, passed directly beneath the helicopter's fuselage, missed by maybe 10 feet. Another RPG impacted the trees beyond the clearing. The helicopter was taking concentrated fire. The pilot made the decision. We're taking off. Now. The helicopter lifted. The ramp was still partially open. The crew chief was still securing litters. The wounded were aboard, but not fully secured. But staying on the ground meant the helicopter would be destroyed. The CH-53 climbed. 50 feet, 100 feet, 200 feet, and then the catastrophic failure occurred. One of the RPGs had found something critical. Hydraulic lines. Flight control systems. Something. The helicopter began losing power. The nose dropped. The pilot fought the controls. The helicopter cleared the immediate area but could not maintain altitude. The pilot transmitted a mayday call. The aircraft descended rapidly toward the jungle canopy 2 kilometers east of B Company's position. The helicopter crashed. The crew survived. The wounded survived. But now they needed rescue themselves. Another helicopter had to be dispatched to extract the crashed CH-53 crew and passengers. More resources pulled into the operational area. More aircraft at risk. And B Company was still surrounded. Still fighting. Still outnumbered. September 13th. Hour 72 of continuous combat. The ammunition situation had reached critical levels. McCarley ordered a weapons count. 4 Americans had no ammunition remaining for their M16 rifles. They were armed now with captured AK-47 rifles and whatever ammunition could be scavenged from dead North Vietnamese soldiers. The remaining Americans averaged 1.5 magazines each. 45 rounds. The Montagnards were in similar condition. Worse, the water was gone. Canteens empty. The heat was relentless. Dehydration was affecting combat effectiveness as severely as wounds. Men's hands shook. Vision blurred. Concentration wavered. Gary Mike Rose was treating heat casualties now in addition to combat wounds. 2 Montagnards had collapsed from heat exhaustion. Rose forced them to drink from a muddy stream. Water that would likely cause dysentery, but dehydration would kill faster than contaminated water. The North Vietnamese attacks continued. But the character of the attacks had changed. The NVA were being more cautious now. They had learned that American air support was devastating. They had watched their own soldiers burned alive by napalm. Watched positions obliterated by 500-pound bombs. The NVA were now using standoff tactics. Snipers. Occasional RPG strikes. Probing attacks designed to locate the American positions without committing to full assaults. This was actually worse for B Company. The sustained contact meant the North Vietnamese maintained continuous pressure without giving the Americans clear targets to engage. Ammunition was being expended on fleeting targets. Suppressive fire into suspected enemy positions. Ammunition they could not afford to waste. At 09:15, the decision was made at Command and Control Central Headquarters. B Company had to be extracted. Immediately. Regardless of cost. Regardless of risk. The unit was on the edge of destruction. The plan was simple and desperate. Saturation bombing around B Company's position. Create a physical barrier of destroyed terrain that would prevent North Vietnamese assault elements from concentrating. Then bring in every available helicopter simultaneously. Extract the entire force in one massive airlift operation. The bombing began at 1000 hours. 6 A-1 Sky Raiders. 4 F-4 Phantom jets from Ubon Air Force Base in Thailand. The aircraft orbited overhead and then began their runs. One aircraft after another. Bombs, napalm, rockets, cannon fire. The jungle around B Company's position was systematically destroyed. The noise was beyond description. Continuous explosions. The ground shook. Trees fell. The air filled with smoke and dust and debris. The bombardment continued for 43 minutes without pause. When it ended, the jungle north of B Company's position no longer existed. Cratered moonscape, burning vegetation, the smell of high explosives and aviation fuel and burning wood. And then the helicopters came. At 11:07, 3 CH-53 helicopters descended toward the clearing simultaneously. The pilots came in fast. Combat approach. Maximum speed. Minimum time on the ground. The helicopters flared. Touchdown. The ramps dropped. Move, move, move. McCarley was shouting. The Americans grabbed wounded. The Montagnards ran toward the helicopters carrying ammunition boxes and equipment. Everyone moved. The North Vietnamese opened fire. They had survived the bombardment. Some of them. Enough of them. Machine gun fire raked across the clearing. Tracer rounds converged on the helicopters. An RPG struck the lead helicopter's rotor assembly. The explosion was massive. Shrapnel peppered the other helicopters. But the pilots held position, stayed on the ground. The door gunners returned fire with their M60 machine guns. B Company loaded. The wounded first. Then the walking casualties. Then the Montagnards. Finally, the Americans still capable of fighting. They loaded by teams. Organized. Professional. Even under fire. Even exhausted. Training held. McCarley was the last American aboard. He counted heads. 11 Americans. Approximately 90 Montagnards. The rest were dead or already evacuated. We're loaded. Go. The helicopters lifted. All three simultaneously. Maximum power. The turbines screamed. The rotors clawed at the air. The helicopters climbed through the smoke and debris. Small arms fire followed them. Tracer rounds arcing upward. But the helicopters were climbing fast. 200 feet. 500 feet. 1,000 feet. Clear of the engagement area. Inside the cargo bay, men collapsed. Some were crying. Some were laughing. Some sat silently staring at nothing. The adrenaline was fading. The exhaustion was overwhelming. The realization that they had survived was just beginning to settle in. Gary Mike Rose moved through the helicopter checking casualties, rebandaging wounds, monitoring vitals. Professional to the end. He would later receive the Medal of Honor for his actions during Operation Tailwind. Extraordinary courage under fire. Continuous medical treatment of casualties over 4 days of sustained combat. 78 hours without sleep. Multiple wounds himself. He had saved lives that military doctrine said should have been lost. The helicopters landed at Command and Control Central Headquarters at 12:36. Medical teams were waiting. Stretchers. Ambulances. The seriously wounded were loaded immediately and transported to surgical facilities. The final casualty count for Operation Tailwind was devastating and miraculous simultaneously. All 16 American soldiers wounded at least once. 3 Americans killed in action. Approximately 40 Montagnard fighters wounded. Estimates of Montagnard killed in action range from 12 to 20. The exact number was never conclusively determined. The indigenous fighter casualty reporting was less precise than American casualty documentation. Estimated North Vietnamese casualties exceeded 500. Confirmed kills numbered at least 150. Some intelligence assessments suggested the actual NVA casualties approached 700 when wounded were included. The dense jungle canopy and dispersed enemy force structures made precise body counts impossible. But the North Vietnamese 2nd Regiment headquarters was abandoned following the operation. The division-level base area was evacuated. American intelligence assessed that the NVA sustained such heavy casualties that the unit required months to reconstitute and return to operational effectiveness. The official Army after-action report on Operation Tailwind described the mission as successful reconnaissance and enemy engagement operation, resulting in significant enemy casualties and valuable intelligence regarding NVA dispositions in southeastern Laos. What the official report did not capture, what no official document could capture, was the human cost. Captain Gene McCarley was 29 years old when the operation began. He aged years during those 4 days. Sergeant Melvin Hill survived his chest wound and was evacuated to Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C. He spent 8 months in recovery. Jose Astorga's shattered femur required multiple surgeries. He walked with a permanent limp for the rest of his life. Gary Mike Rose would later describe Operation Tailwind as the longest 4 days of my life. He never spoke publicly about the operation for more than 20 years. The memories were too intense. The weight of the wounded he could not save too heavy. The men who survived Operation Tailwind would carry it with them forever. They had proven that 16 Americans and 120 indigenous fighters could survive 4 days of continuous combat against 600 enemy soldiers. Had proven that courage and air support and sheer refusal to die could overcome odds that mathematics said should result in annihilation. But survival came with cost. Physical wounds healed. The psychological wounds, the sounds of men screaming in the jungle darkness, the weight of carrying wounded through hostile terrain, the faces of soldiers who did not make it home, those wounds remained. Operation Tailwind was classified secret for 23 years. The men who fought there were forbidden from discussing the mission. When the operation was finally declassified in 1993, some of the veterans chose to tell their stories. Others remained silent. The mission had taken something from them that they could never fully articulate, something that words could not capture. What remained certain across all the years and all the silence was this. Operation Tailwind represented American Special Operations soldiers fighting at the absolute limit of human capability, accepting casualty rates that would be unthinkable in modern military operations, achieving survival through tactical excellence, devastating close air support, and the fundamental warrior spirit that refuses to accept defeat even when defeat appears inevitable. The mission proved what the men of Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group already knew, that small teams operating in denied territory against overwhelming odds could achieve the impossible. That courage measured in the moment-by-moment decisions to keep fighting when every rational calculation said to surrender. That the covenant between warriors, that we leave no one behind, that we fight for each other, that we survive together or die together, was not abstract principle but lived reality. 16 men and 120 indigenous fighters inserted into the operational area on September 11, 1970. The mission was supposed to last 72 hours. It became 96 hours of continuous combat. They emerged from the jungle on September 14th wounded, exhausted, forever changed. But they emerged against 600 enemy soldiers, against impossible odds. They fought their way out, and that made all the difference. At 11:43 on the morning of March 14th, 1967, Sergeant First Class James Shorten crouched in elephant grass 8 miles inside Laos, sweat burning his eyes, listening to the metallic crackle of a voice that made his stomach drop. A downed pilot screaming for help on the survival radio frequency. 27 years old, Green Beret, MACV SOG recon specialist from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. 3 years in Vietnam. 14 previous bright light missions completed. The grass stood 7 feet tall. The humidity was suffocating, 94%. Temperature was 98 degrees. Shorten's uniform was already soaked through, clinging to his back like a second skin. His CAR-15 rifle weighed 6.9 pounds. 8 magazines, 20 rounds per magazine, 160 rounds total. For fragmentation grenades, 2 white phosphorus grenades, 1 survival knife, 1 canteen, 32 ounces of water that would have to last until extraction. No food, no spare ammunition, no backup plan. The pilot's voice came through again, breaking with panic. Covey, this is Viper 2-1. I am down. Taking fire. Grid coordinates November Delta 874239. Please advise, over. The coordinates placed the downed pilot 2,400 yards northeast, 1.4 miles through jungle terrain that intelligence reports indicated contained between 80 and 120 North Vietnamese Army soldiers organized into platoons with heavy weapons. Shorten's team leader, Captain Michael Island, had told him 2 days earlier, bright light missions are the closest thing to authorized suicide the military permits. You go in fast. You find them. You bring them out. Or you die trying. What Captain Island did not tell Shorten, what nobody could tell him until he experienced it himself, was that bright light missions would become the defining covenant of the secret war. A promise written in blood and kept at impossible cost. If you go down, we will come for you. No matter the odds. No matter the enemy's strength. No matter the probability of success. This promise would be tested 2,300 times across 8 years of war. And men like James Shorten would prove that impossible rescues could succeed. The concept of bright light missions emerged from a brutal mathematical reality that American military planners confronted in 1965. United States Air Force pilots were being shot down at rates that shocked Pentagon analysts. During peak operational periods in 1966 and 1967, the Air Force was losing an average of 68 aircraft per day across the entire theater of operations. Not every aircraft loss resulted in downed pilots requiring rescue. Some crashes killed crews instantly. Some occurred over friendly territory where conventional search and rescue could respond. But the numbers were staggering nonetheless. Pilots who ejected or crash-landed over Laos, Cambodia, or North Vietnam faced survival odds that were statistically catastrophic. Without rapid rescue response, the probability of capture or death approached 90% within the first 12 hours. North Vietnamese forces actively hunted down pilots, understanding that capturing American aviators provided propaganda value, intelligence through interrogation, and the psychological impact of denying rescue. Standard military search and rescue doctrine, designed for conventional warfare, could not function in denied territory. Air Force rescue helicopters, even when escorted by gunships and fighter aircraft, required secure landing zones and sufficient time to coordinate extraction. In heavily defended areas deep inside Laos or Cambodia, these conditions simply did not exist. Enemy forces could concentrate around crash sites faster than conventional rescue forces could organize response. MACV SOG filled this gap through the creation of dedicated rapid response teams trained specifically for high-risk rescue operations in denied territory. The term bright light became the operational code name for these missions, distinguishing them from standard reconnaissance missions designated Prairie Fire, Salem House, or Daniel Boone, depending on operational area. The organizational structure of bright light missions reflected their unique requirements. Teams were deliberately kept small, typically 2 to 4 American Special Forces soldiers supplemented by 4 to 6 indigenous fighters, usually Montagnard tribesmen or Nung Chinese who had proven reliable in previous operations. Small team size enabled rapid insertion, reduced the logistics footprint, and allowed teams to move through jungle terrain with speed that larger formations could not match. But what truly distinguished bright light missions from every other military operation conducted during the Vietnam War was the load configuration. Bright light teams carried no food. This was not oversight or logistical failure. It was deliberate operational doctrine. Every ounce of weight capacity beyond weapons and ammunition was devoted to rescue equipment, medical supplies, rope, extraction harnesses, body bags for remains recovery, and additional ammunition for sustained firefights. The typical bright light operator carried between 40 and 50 pounds of equipment, a CAR-15 rifle or M16 rifle, 8 to 12 magazines of ammunition, fragmentation grenades, smoke grenades, white phosphorus grenades for signaling aircraft, 1 canteen of water, 32 ounces, a PRC-25 radio or, for team leaders, both a tactical radio and a URC-10 survival radio for communicating with aircraft, a survival knife, medical supplies including morphine, bandages, and plasma expanders, rope for rappelling or hoisting wounded personnel into hovering helicopters. What they did not carry: rations, sleeping equipment, spare clothing, extra water, or any provision for extended operations. Bright light doctrine assumed that missions would last between 4 and 18 hours. Insert, locate the objective, extract, and return to base before exhaustion, thirst, or ammunition depletion made continuation impossible. Staff Sergeant Ronald Terry from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, learned the fundamental truth of bright light operations during his first mission in June 1968. 24 years old. Special Forces qualified. 6 months in country with MACV SOG. He had completed 9 reconnaissance missions before receiving his first bright light tasking. Rescue of an Air Force F-4 Phantom crew shot down during a bombing mission over the Ho Chi Minh Trail in southeastern Laos. The mission brief was delivered at 0430 hours, 4:30 in the morning, at the forward operating base in Sante. The F-4 had been hit by anti-aircraft fire at approximately 2200 hours the previous night. Both crew members, pilot and weapons systems officer, had ejected. Radio contact had been established with the pilot, call sign Viper 32, who reported injuries but confirmed he was mobile and concealed approximately 800 yards from the crash site. The weapons systems officer had not made radio contact. Status unknown. Intelligence estimated enemy strength in the area at platoon level, approximately 30 to 40 North Vietnamese soldiers. The terrain was mountainous jungle with triple canopy forest coverage that would prevent helicopter landing except in rare clearings. Weather was marginal, clouds ceiling at 1,000 feet, intermittent rain. Terry's team consisted of himself as 1-0, team leader, plus Sergeant First Class David McKinney from Tulsa, Oklahoma, as 1-1, assistant team leader, and Specialist 4th Class Paul Fitzgerald from Boston, Massachusetts, as 1-2, the radio operator and medic. For Montagnard fighters completed the team. At 0515, 5:15 in the morning, a Huey helicopter lifted Terry's team from Sante and flew west toward the Laotian border. Flight time was 18 minutes. Terry sat in the open door, watching the darkness give way to gray dawn. His hands were not shaking. That surprised him. He had expected fear. Instead, he felt an odd clarity, as if the entirety of his training had compressed into this single moment. The helicopter descended toward a small clearing identified through infrared imagery as the nearest landing zone to the downed pilot's position. The door gunner's M60 machine gun remained silent. No enemy fire. The Huey flared hard, settling into grass that reached the helicopter's skids. Terry jumped. His boots hit soft ground. The Montagnards followed. McKinney and Fitzgerald were last out. The entire insertion took 11 seconds. The helicopter lifted immediately, rotor wash flattening the grass in concentric circles. Then silence. The jungle absorbed sound. Terry could hear his own breathing, too loud in his ears. He signaled the team to move. What Terry did not know, what the intelligence briefing had not told him because the analysts themselves did not know, was that the F-4 had crashed directly adjacent to a North Vietnamese Army supply depot containing more than 200 soldiers, with additional infantry platoons stationed along nearby trail segments for security. The actual enemy strength in the immediate area was not 30 soldiers. It was closer to 300. The team moved northeast, following a compass bearing toward the pilot's last known coordinates. Movement through triple canopy jungle was exhausting. Vines caught equipment. Roots created trip hazards. Visibility extended perhaps 30 yards before the vegetation became an impenetrable green wall. Terry counted his paces, 1,200 paces in the first 20 minutes. Approximately 800 yards covered. At 0547, 5:47 in the morning, Fitzgerald, monitoring the survival radio frequency, reported contact with the downed pilot. The pilot's voice was weak but coherent. He confirmed his position. He reported hearing voices, Vietnamese voices, approximately 200 yards from his concealment position. He requested immediate extraction. Terry calculated the distance. 400 more yards. Perhaps 15 minutes of movement if the terrain remained navigable. He signaled the team to increase pace. What happened next would define Terry's understanding of bright light operations for the rest of his life. At 0603, 6:03 in the morning, the team came under fire. The first rounds were single shots. Crack, 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 the distinctive sound of AK-47 rifles. Bullets snapped through leaves. One round struck a tree 6 inches from McKinney's head, spraying bark. Terry dropped to prone position. The Montagnards scattered to defensive positions without needing commands. Fitzgerald was already on the radio, calling for air support. But Terry understood immediately. Engaging the enemy meant delay. Delay meant the North Vietnamese would have time to concentrate forces. Time to organize coordinated assault. Time to locate and capture or kill the downed pilot before rescue could be achieved. The fundamental doctrine of bright light missions demanded a choice that defied conventional military tactics. Do not fight unless fighting is unavoidable. Speed mattered more than security. Movement mattered more than engagement. The objective was rescue, not combat. Terry made the decision. He signaled to break contact. The team moved perpendicular to the enemy fire, running through the jungle, crashing through vegetation, abandoning noise discipline in favor of speed. Behind them, the crack of rifle fire continued, but the North Vietnamese were firing at positions the team had already vacated. They ran for 3 minutes. Terry's lungs burned. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes, blurring his vision. His equipment, 52 pounds of weapons, ammunition, and gear, felt like it weighed twice that. His legs felt heavy, muscles screaming. But he kept moving. At 6:11 in the morning, they reached the pilot's position. The pilot was 26 years old. First Lieutenant Robert Donnelly from Minneapolis, Minnesota. He had ejected from the F-4 Phantom at approximately 4,000 feet altitude after the aircraft's right engine exploded from anti-aircraft fire. The ejection sequence had worked correctly. The parachute had deployed. But the landing, descending through triple canopy jungle and darkness, had been catastrophic. Donnelly had fallen through the upper canopy, his parachute catching momentarily on branches before tearing free. He had crashed through the middle canopy, arms instinctively covering his face. Finally, he had slammed into the ground, the impact driving the air from his lungs and sending lightning bolts of pain through his left leg. When Terry found him, Donnelly was conscious but in severe pain. His left leg was broken, a compound fracture of the tibia with the bone visible through torn flight suit fabric. His face was lacerated from branches. His hands were bleeding, but he was alive. Terry knelt beside him. "Lieutenant, I'm Sergeant Terry, MACV SOG. We're getting you out." Donnelly's eyes were wide, pupils dilated from shock and pain. "My WSO, Weapons Systems Officer, did you find him?" Terry shook his head. "Not yet. Right now, we focus on you." Fitzgerald was already working, cutting away the flight suit fabric around the broken leg, assessing the injury. McKinney established security, positioning the Montagnards in a defensive perimeter. The jungle around them was quiet. Too quiet. Fitzgerald looked at Terry. His expression said everything. The leg was bad. Moving Donnelly would be agonizing. Carrying him through jungle terrain would be slow. Slow meant vulnerable. Terry keyed his radio. Covey, this is Bright Light 10. We have located Viper 3-2. He is alive. Compound fracture left leg. Request immediate extraction. Over. The forward air controller's voice came back, calm and professional. Bright Light 10, Covey copies. Nearest landing zone is 600 yards northeast your position. Can you move to that location? Over. 600 yards. Carrying a wounded man. Through jungle. With enemy forces actively searching for them. Terry looked at Donnelly. "Can you walk?" Donnelly tried to move his leg. The pain made him gasp, face going white. "Negative. No way." McKinney was already improvising a stretcher from bamboo poles and a poncho. The Montagnards helped, moving with practiced efficiency. They had done this before. They understood what was required. At 6:27 in the morning, the team began moving toward the landing zone. 2 Montagnards carrying the stretcher with Donnelly strapped to it, Terry on point, McKinney covering the rear, Fitzgerald monitoring the radio. The movement was agonizingly slow. The stretcher caught on vegetation. The Montagnards had to stop every 50 yards to adjust their grip, to rest their arms. Donnelly was trying not to scream. Every jostle of the stretcher sent pain through his shattered leg, but small sounds escaped anyway, sounds that carried through the jungle. At 6:39 in the morning, the North Vietnamese found them again. This time, the contact was not single rifle shots. This time, it was coordinated ambush. Automatic weapons fire erupted from 3 directions: ahead, left flank, and rear. The distinctive sound of RPD machine guns, Soviet-designed light machine guns firing 7.62 mm rounds at 650 rounds per minute. Bullets tore through the jungle, shredding leaves, splintering branches. One Montagnard carrying the stretcher took a round through the shoulder. He fell, screaming. The stretcher dropped. Donnelly hit the ground hard, crying out in pain. Terry was firing short controlled bursts from his CR-15, aiming at muzzle flashes barely visible through the vegetation. McKinney threw grenades. 1, 2, 3. The explosions flat and sharp, followed by screams. Fitzgerald was on the radio, voice urgent but controlled. Covey, bright light is in heavy contact. Multiple enemy. We need air support immediate. Over. The FAC responded. Bright light, Covey copies, Sky Raiders inbound. 3 minutes out. Can you mark your position? Over. 3 minutes. 180 seconds. It felt like forever. Terry pulled a smoke grenade from his web gear, yanked the pin, and threw it into the clearing ahead of their position. Purple smoke billowed upward, spreading through the canopy. He grabbed the stretcher. We move now. Go, go, go. The team ran. One wounded Montagnard was left behind. There was no time, no possibility of carrying both him and the pilot. The other Montagnards grabbed the stretcher and ran, crashing through the jungle. Behind them, the firefight continued. Terry could hear the wounded Montagnards still firing, covering their escape, buying them seconds. Then the firing stopped. Terry knew what that meant. The Montagnard was either dead or captured. There was nothing to be done. At 6:42 in the morning, the A-1 Sky Raiders arrived. The sound came first, the distinctive, deep-throated roar of Wright R3350 Cyclone engines, 18 cylinders, 2,700 horsepower per engine. The A-1 Sky Raider was a propeller-driven attack aircraft that looked obsolete compared to the sleek jet fighters dominating the war. But for close air support in jungle terrain, nothing matched the Sky Raider's capability. The lead Sky Raider, callsign Sandy 1, dove toward the purple smoke marking the team's position. The pilot's voice came over the radio. Bright light. Sandy 1 has visual on your smoke. We see enemy movement northeast of your position, rolling in hot. Keep your heads down. Over. Terry pressed himself flat against the ground. The Montagnards did the same. Fitzgerald covered Donnelly's body with his own, shielding the injured pilot. The Sky Raider came in low, maybe 200 feet above the canopy, and released ordnance. The sound was apocalyptic. High explosive rockets impacted the jungle with concussive force that Terry felt in his chest. The explosions were massive, each one throwing dirt and vegetation and pieces of trees into the air. Secondary explosions followed, ammunition or equipment cooking off from the heat. Sandy 2 followed immediately, strafing runs with 20mm cannons, each cannon firing 650 rounds per minute. The sound was like tearing fabric, a continuous ripping noise punctuated by the impacts of cannon shells detonating in the jungle. Trees literally disintegrated under the cannon fire. The enemy fire stopped. The North Vietnamese, facing devastating air attack, broke contact and retreated. Terry used the moment. Move. Landing zone, 200 yards, go. The team ran. Terry's legs felt like lead. His lungs burned. Sweat soaked his uniform completely, dripping from his chin, blurring his vision. The CAR-15 felt impossibly heavy. His hands were shaking now, not from fear but from exhaustion, from adrenaline dump, from the physical toll of combat movement while carrying heavy equipment. They reached the landing zone at 6:51 in the morning. It was barely adequate, a small clearing perhaps 40 yards in diameter, surrounded by trees. McKinney popped green smoke, signaling the extraction helicopter. The Huey came in fast, flaring hard, nose high, tail low. The skids touched grass. Terry and McKinney lifted Donnelly's stretcher and ran toward the helicopter. The door gunners were firing. M60 machine guns hammering away at the tree line, suppressive fire to keep enemy heads down. They loaded Donnelly aboard. The Montagnards scrambled into the helicopter. Fitzgerald jumped in. Terry was last, grabbing the door frame and pulling himself up as the helicopter lifted. As they climbed, Terry looked down. He could see North Vietnamese soldiers emerging from the jungle, running toward the landing zone. Too late. The helicopter was already at 500 feet, accelerating away. The flight back to Kontum took 16 minutes. Terry sat on the deck, back against the bulkhead, watching Fitzgerald work on Donnelly's leg, splinting it properly now that they had time and relative safety. Donnelly was conscious, his face pale but composed. He was going to survive. Terry thought about the Montagnard they had left behind, the one who had taken a bullet and stayed to cover their escape. He did not know the man's name. That was the worst part. He had fought beside him, and he did not even know his name. When they landed at Kontum, medical personnel rushed Donnelly to the base hospital. Terry's after-action report was brief. Mission success, pilot rescued. 1 indigenous friendly killed in action. Enemy casualties estimated at 15 to 20 from airstrikes. Time on ground, 1 hour 6 minutes. The intelligence officer asked if Terry would volunteer for additional bright light missions. Terry said yes. He would go on to complete 17 more bright light operations over the next 14 months. 12 would succeed. 5 would fail. Pilots already dead when the teams arrived, or positions too heavily defended to permit rescue, or enemy forces reaching crash sites before MACV SOG teams could insert. But the covenant remained. If you go down, we will come for you. In November 1969, the Bright Light Covenant faced its most severe test. An HH-3 Jolly Green Giant rescue helicopter, call sign Jolly 27, was shot down during an attempted rescue of a downed F-105 Thunderchief pilot deep in Laos. The helicopter, hit by 37mm anti-aircraft fire, crashed in mountainous jungle terrain approximately 43 miles west of the DMZ, the demilitarized zone separating North and South Vietnam. The helicopter carried a crew of 4: pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer, and pararescue jumper. Additionally, the helicopter had just picked up the F-105 pilot before being hit. 5 Americans total. All survived the crash. All were mobile, but they were surrounded by North Vietnamese forces that had shot down the helicopter specifically to capture the crew. The situation was tactically catastrophic. The crash site was in a valley surrounded by high ridges. Enemy forces controlled the high ground. Weather was deteriorating, cloud ceiling dropping, visibility decreasing. Conventional rescue forces could not insert without facing the same anti-aircraft fire that had downed Jolly 27. MACV SOG received the mission at 1400 hours, 2 in the afternoon. The tasking was unambiguous. Rescue 5 Americans from a hot landing zone surrounded by enemy forces with heavy weapons in deteriorating weather conditions. Master Sergeant Roy Benavidez from El Campo, Texas, volunteered. 33 years old. Special Forces. 2 previous combat tours in Vietnam. Benavidez had been wounded previously, shrapnel from a landmine in 1965 that nearly ended his military career. Doctors told him he would never walk again. Benavidez spent a year in physical rehabilitation, rebuilding his strength through sheer determination, and returned to active duty. Now he was being asked to insert into a landing zone that had already proven lethal to a heavily armed and armored rescue helicopter. Benavidez assembled a team. Sergeant First Class Leroy Wright from Detroit, Michigan. Staff Sergeant Lloyd Musso from Chicago, Illinois. Specialist 4th Class Brian O'Connor from Sacramento, California. Plus 6 Montagnard fighters. 10 men total. At 1500 hours, 3 in the afternoon, a Huey helicopter lifted the team from Loc Ninh and flew west toward Laos. Benavidez sat in the open door, checking his equipment one final time. CAR-15 rifle, 12 magazines, 6 fragmentation grenades, 2 smoke grenades, medical supplies, morphine, 1 canteen of water. His hands were steady. His mind was clear. He had done this before. But something about this mission felt different. The odds were worse. The enemy's strength was greater. The likelihood of success was minimal. The helicopter approached the crash site. Benavidez could see smoke rising from the valley, the downed Jolly Green Giant burning. He could see the 5 American survivors clustered near the wreckage, using it for cover. And he could see enemy soldiers, dozens of them, moving through the jungle toward the crash site. The Huey descended. At 200 feet, enemy fire erupted. AK-47 rounds, machine gun fire, rocket-propelled grenades. 1 RPG passed so close to the helicopter that Benavidez could feel the heat. The helicopter pilot aborted the landing, pulling up hard, banking away. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. Too hot. We cannot land. Benavidez keyed his headset. Get me close. I will jump. The pilot hesitated. Then, Roger. Coming around. The Huey made another approach, this time at higher speed, lower altitude. At 75 feet above the ground, Benavidez jumped. He hit the ground hard, rolling, absorbing impact. His ankle twisted, pain shot up his leg. He ignored it. He was up, running toward the crash site, firing his CR-15 as he moved. The Montagnards were behind him, their own weapons chattering. Benavidez reached the 5 survivors. The F-105 pilot had a gunshot wound to his abdomen. The Jolly Green helicopter pilot had multiple shrapnel wounds. The others were mobile but suppressed by enemy fire. Benavidez began organizing defensive positions. He directed the Montagnards to establish a perimeter. He administered morphine to the wounded. He was on the radio, calling for air support, for extraction helicopters, for anything that could get them out. Then he was hit. An AK-47 round struck his left thigh. The impact knocked him down. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. He could feel blood soaking his trousers. He pressed his hand against the wound, applying pressure. He could not stop. There were 8 other men depending on him. He got up. His leg barely supported his weight. He limped to the next position, still directing fire, still organizing the defense. He was hit again, this time in the back. The round felt like being struck by a hammer. His breath left him. He fell forward, face in the dirt. For a moment, he could not move. His body refused commands. Then training took over. Muscle memory. He pushed himself up. His arms were shaking. Blood was running down his back. He could taste copper in his mouth. But he was not dead. Not yet. Over the next 4 hours, Benavidez was wounded 7 times total. Gunshot wounds to both legs, his back, his abdomen. Shrapnel wounds from grenades. A bayonet wound when a North Vietnamese soldier attempted to finish him in hand-to-hand combat. Benavidez killed the soldier with his knife. Throughout those 4 hours, he continued fighting. He administered medical aid to 8 wounded men. He called in airstrikes that killed dozens of enemy soldiers. He organized the defensive perimeter that prevented the North Vietnamese from overrunning the position. At 1900 hours, 7 in the evening, extraction helicopters arrived, supported by A-1 Sky Raiders laying down devastating suppressive fire. The survivors were loaded aboard. Benavidez, barely conscious from blood loss, was the last man on the helicopter. When the helicopter landed at the medical facility, Benavidez was placed in a body bag. Medical personnel thought he was dead. As a doctor was about to zip the bag closed, Benavidez spit in the doctor's face. The only movement he could manage to indicate he was still alive. He survived. 6 months of hospitalization, multiple surgeries, but he survived. 13 years later, in 1981, Roy Benavidez received the Medal of Honor from President Ronald Reagan for his actions during that rescue mission. The citation detailed 37 separate acts of valor performed during 6 hours of continuous combat. The 5 Americans he rescued all survived. The Bright Light Covenant had been kept. Between 1964 and 1972, MACV SOG conducted approximately 2,300 bright light rescue missions across Laos, Cambodia, and North Vietnam. Detailed records remain classified, but declassified after-action reports and veteran accounts provide statistical outlines. Approximately 72% of bright light missions successfully rescued or recovered their objectives. Downed pilots extracted alive. Remains of killed aircrew recovered for return to families. Reconnaissance teams overrun by enemy forces rescued before annihilation. 28% failed. Teams unable to reach objectives due to enemy strength. Pilots already captured or killed before rescue could be attempted. Positions too heavily defended to permit insertion. The casualty rate among bright light operators was staggering. Approximately 43% of MACV SOG personnel who participated in bright light missions were killed or wounded during operations. This casualty rate exceeded casualty rates for virtually every other military specialty during the Vietnam War. Yet volunteers never stopped coming forward. When a bright light mission was announced, hands went up. Men volunteered knowing the statistical probability of death or injury was close to 1 in 2. They volunteered because the covenant mattered. Because leaving no one behind was not rhetoric. It was sacred obligation. The emotional toll on bright light operators was profound and permanent. James Shorten, who completed 21 bright light missions between 1967 and 1969, described the psychological weight in an interview conducted 40 years after the war. You carry them with you. The ones you saved and the ones you could not save. I can tell you the name of every pilot we rescued. I can tell you the name of every pilot we found already dead. I see their faces. I will see their faces until I die. Staff Sergeant Ronald Terry, who completed 17 bright light missions, never spoke publicly about his experiences until 2008, when he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. In one of his final interviews, he said, "People ask if it was worth it. They ask if the cost was justified. I tell them this. Every man we brought home got to see his family again. Every man we brought home got to live the rest of his life. How do you calculate the worth of a life? How do you measure that in casualties or cost? We made a promise. We kept the promise. That is all that matters. The promise was simple. The execution was impossibly dangerous. But the covenant endured. If you went down, they would come for you. No matter the odds. No matter the cost. No matter the probability of success. This was bright light. This was the most dangerous promise in Vietnam. And it was kept again and again by men who understood that some obligations transcend survival. At 2:18 on the morning of November 21st, 1970, 56 American warriors crashed a helicopter directly into a North Vietnamese prison compound 23 miles west of Hanoi. 6 months of training, 400 men in the planning, presidential approval, every building memorized, every contingency mapped. The most meticulously prepared special operations mission in American military history. They executed it perfectly. They rescued no one. The prison was empty. The intelligence was catastrophically wrong. And what followed became the most perfect failure in special operations history. A mission that succeeded in every way except the one that mattered most. Lieutenant Colonel Herbert Zinder gripped the controls of the HH-3 helicopter, call sign Banana. 56 years old. 28 years flying military aircraft. He was piloting 14,000 pounds of aircraft loaded with fuel, crew, and 14 Green Berets toward a controlled crash inside enemy territory. The helicopter's specifications told the story of what he was attempting. Rotor diameter, 62 feet. Maximum speed, 121 miles per hour. Combat radius, 465 miles. Zinder was flying at 50 feet above the treetops with no running lights. Instruments barely visible in red night vision glow, threading through North Vietnamese air defenses like he was flying a tactical fighter instead of a transport helicopter. Behind him in the cargo bay sat Captain Dick Meadows, 39 years old. Multiple Vietnam tours. Bronze Star with V device for valor. Meadows commanded the Blue Boy assault team. The men who would hit the prison cells first, breach every door, and extract the prisoners before North Vietnamese reinforcements could arrive. Total planned time on ground, 27 minutes. The mission concept was brutally simple. Crash the helicopter inside the compound walls where no helicopter should fit, storm the prison buildings, grab American prisoners of war, load them on extraction helicopters, and escape before the enemy could organize a response. What made this mission different from every other rescue operation in the Vietnam War was the location. Sante prison sat 23 miles west of Hanoi, deep inside North Vietnam, surrounded by enemy forces, protected by air defense networks, isolated from any possible American ground reinforcement. If something went wrong, no one was coming to save them. In March 1970, analysts at the Defense Intelligence Agency examined overhead reconnaissance photographs of a compound near the Song Con River in North Vietnam. The images showed everything intelligence officers expected from a prisoner of war facility. Guard towers positioned at each corner. Barbed wire perimeter. Cell blocks arranged in military precision. Movement patterns suggesting organized prisoner activity. Vehicle traffic consistent with supply operations. The camp received the designation Sante. Signal intelligence officers added confirmation. Radio intercepts referenced American prisoners at the location. The intercepts weren't specific about numbers, but the pattern was consistent enough to build confidence. Active prisoner facility. American personnel. Ongoing operations. By May, intelligence analysts reached their conclusion. Between 55 and 61 American prisoners were being held at Sante. The assessment synthesized multiple intelligence sources. Overhead imagery. Radio intercepts. Human intelligence from sources operating inside North Vietnam. The intelligence community rated their assessment as high confidence. The strategic context made the intelligence explosive. More than 450 American servicemen were confirmed prisoners scattered across North Vietnam. The North Vietnamese government refused international Red Cross inspection of prison facilities. Torture was documented through returning prisoner testimony. Malnutrition was systematic. Prison conditions violated every international convention governing treatment of prisoners of war. American families demanded action. Congressional representatives questioned military leadership about why rescue operations weren't being attempted. The war itself was increasingly unpopular with the American public, but rescuing prisoners, bringing American servicemen home, had near-universal political support. President Richard Nixon received the Sante intelligence briefing in July 1970. The political calculation was brutal. A successful rescue would demonstrate American resolve and capability in a way that could reshape negotiations with North Vietnam. A failed rescue would be an international catastrophe that could destroy what remained of public support for the war. Nixon authorized planning for the raid. The operation would be the first American ground combat operation conducted deep inside North Vietnamese territory since the war began. It required explicit presidential approval because the political consequences extended far beyond the military personnel involved. The mission received its code name, Operation Ivory Coast. Brigadier General Leroy Manor received appointment as overall mission commander. 50 years old, combat veteran of World War II and Korea. Manor possessed the strategic thinking and operational experience necessary to coordinate a joint Air Force-Army operation that would require hundreds of aircraft operating under absolute secrecy. Colonel Arthur Simons, universally known throughout Special Forces as Bull Simons, became ground assault commander. 51 years old, World War II veteran, multiple tours in Vietnam. Simons represented the archetype of the Special Forces officer, tactically brilliant, personally fearless, and possessed of the leadership charisma that made soldiers volunteer for missions they understood might be suicide. His reputation was built on one principle. He brought his men home. The assault force would be drawn entirely from Army Special Forces, Green Berets with Vietnam combat experience, airborne qualified, trained in close quarters combat, and prisoner handling. The selection process was conducted quietly. No announcements, no explanations, no revelation of the mission objective. Officers approached individual soldiers with a simple question: would you volunteer for a mission we can't tell you about, with training starting immediately, for an objective we won't reveal until you're committed? 56 men volunteered. Training began at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. Military engineers constructed a full-scale replica of Sante prison compound based on overhead reconnaissance photographs. Every building was reproduced to exact dimensions. Every wall, every guard tower, every door, every obstacle. The replica was built in a remote section of the base where civilian aircraft couldn't observe training operations. The assault force studied the compound until they could navigate it blindfolded in complete darkness. They rehearsed the assault 170 times. Day assaults, night assaults, assaults with simulated casualties, assaults with equipment failures, assaults with helicopter damage. Every possible contingency was drilled until individual movements became automatic and team coordination became instinctive. The assault plan divided the force into 3 elements, each with a specific tactical mission. Blue Boy, commanded by Captain Meadows, would execute the most dangerous insertion, a deliberate helicopter crash landing directly inside the compound itself. 14 men. Their mission: locate prisoners, eliminate guards inside the compound, breach prison cells, and prepare prisoners for extraction. Red Wine, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Elliot Sidner, would land outside the compound and secure the southern approaches. 20 men. Their mission: establish defensive perimeter, prevent North Vietnamese reinforcements from reaching the compound, and provide covering fire for extraction operations. Greenleaf, led by Bull Simons personally, would assault a building 250 yards from the prison that intelligence identified as a guard barracks. 22 men. Their mission: eliminate any enemy force capable of responding to the raid before they could organize effective resistance. The helicopter force consisted of 6 aircraft. 1 HH-3 for the crash insertion inside the compound. 5 HH-53 helicopters for support and extraction. The HH-53 represented the largest helicopter in the American inventory, 72 feet long, rotor diameter of 72 feet, maximum takeoff weight of 42,000 pounds, capable of carrying 37 troops plus crew. Additionally, more than 100 support aircraft would participate in the operation. A-1 Skyraiders for close air support, F-4 Phantoms for fighter cover, F-105 Thunder Chiefs loaded with bombs to strike North Vietnamese airfields, electronic warfare aircraft to jam enemy radar and communications, aerial tankers to refuel the helicopters during the round-trip flight from Thailand to North Vietnam and back. The operational security was absolute. No phone calls home mentioning training. No letters discussing the mission. No conversations with anyone outside the assault force. If the North Vietnamese learned about the raid before launch, prisoners could be moved to different facilities. Defenses could be reinforced. The entire operation could collapse before it began. On November 18th, 3 days before the scheduled launch, photo interpreters reviewed the most recent reconnaissance imagery of Sante prison. Something had changed. The compound showed significantly reduced activity compared to previous months. Fewer vehicles visible in overhead imagery. Less movement detected. The patterns that had previously suggested active prisoner presence seemed diminished or absent. Intelligence officers debated the meaning. Some argued the reduced activity indicated prisoners had been moved to different facilities. Others countered that seasonal changes in North Vietnamese operations or deliberate security measures could explain the reduced visible activity without indicating prisoner evacuation. The debate reached General Manner. He consulted with Bull Simons and mission planners. The decision, launch the raid as scheduled. The reasoning was pragmatic and brutal. Intelligence was never perfect in wartime conditions. Waiting for better intelligence meant risking the entire operational window. Winter weather approaching North Vietnam would soon make helicopter operations impossible or prohibitively dangerous. Political support for the raid could evaporate. Operational security could fail. The longer the assault force trained, the greater the probability someone would leak information. The calculated assessment concluded that the risks of waiting exceeded the risks of launching with imperfect intelligence. But the doubt remained. The possibility that Sante was empty gnawed at planners in the final 72 hours before launch, the T-2300 hours on November 20th. The assault force boarded helicopters at Udorn Royal Thai Air Force Base in Thailand. Each man carried equipment loads tailored specifically to his tactical role. Blue Boy carried breaching charges, bolt cutters, and wire cutters to penetrate prison cell doors and perimeter fencing. Redwine carried claymore mines and additional ammunition to hold defensive perimeter positions against superior enemy numbers. Greenleaf carried demolitions to destroy the guard barracks and eliminate enemy response capability. Every man carried a minimum of 400 rounds of ammunition. The standard M16 rifle magazine held 20 rounds. That meant at least 20 magazines per soldier. Additional men carried M60 machine guns with belts of 7.62 mm ammunition, grenade launchers, fragmentation grenades, white phosphorus grenades for marking targets and creating smoke screens. The flight distance from Udorn to Sante measured approximately 500 miles round trip, near the maximum operational radius for HH-3 and HH-53 helicopters, even with in-flight refueling. Navigation would be conducted entirely by visual reference and dead reckoning. No electronic navigation aids could be used because North Vietnamese radar networks would detect electronic emissions and alert air defenses. The helicopters lifted off into darkness. They flew low, 50 feet above terrain. Navigation lights extinguished. Formation tight enough to maintain visual contact in darkness, but dispersed enough to avoid mid-air collision. As the formation crossed from Thailand into North Vietnamese airspace, diversionary operations began across the country. Navy fighters launched from aircraft carriers in the Gulf of Tonkin and conducted simulated bombing runs against coastal installations. Air Force F-105 Thunder Chiefs struck multiple North Vietnamese airfields simultaneously. The objective: convince North Vietnamese air defense commanders that a major offensive air campaign was underway, distracting attention from the small helicopter force penetrating towards Sante. The helicopters continued west through darkness. Terrain below was mountainous and covered in jungle, barely visible even to pilots wearing night vision equipment. Zender flew banana at the head of the formation. Behind him, the 5 HH-53s followed in trail formation. At 0210 hours, the formation reached the initial point, a geographic reference 6 miles from Sante where the assault would begin its final approach. The helicopters separated according to plan. Greenleaf's transport helicopter turned toward the suspected guard barracks. Redwine's helicopters moved toward landing zones south of the compound. Banana accelerated toward the prison itself. Zender pushed Banana into a shallow dive towards Sante compound. The prison appeared in darkness ahead, barely visible, marked by faint lights from guard towers positioned at compound corners. The helicopter descended rapidly. 70 feet altitude, 50 feet, 30 feet. The massive rotor blades, 62 feet in diameter, clipped through tree branches surrounding the compound. The sound was tremendous, a metallic thrashing as spinning rotor blades chewed through wood. The helicopter shuddered violently. Zender held the descent angle. Banana hit the ground inside the compound. The landing wasn't gentle, it was a controlled crash. The helicopter bounced. Landing gear compressed under impact forces. The fuselage scraped across dirt. The cargo door flew open before the helicopter fully settled. Blue Boy assault team poured out into the compound. Meadows moved first through the door. His team followed in rehearsed sequence. They spread across the compound in practiced movements perfected through 170 rehearsals. Each man moving toward his assigned building. Each man knowing exactly which door to breach. Each man executing individual actions that coordinated into team tactical precision. North Vietnamese guards reacted to the helicopter crash. Rifle fire cracked from guard towers. Meadows' team engaged immediately. M16 rifles fired controlled bursts. Tracer rounds marked targets in darkness. Grenades arced toward guard positions. Sergeant First Class Tyrone Adderley sprinted toward the cell blocks. He carried bolt cutters and a shotgun loaded with breaching rounds specifically designed to destroy door locks. He reached the first cell block door. He positioned the shotgun muzzle directly against the lock mechanism. He fired. The lock disintegrated under the impact. He kicked the door open. The cell was empty. He moved to the next cell. Same procedure. Shotgun blast against the lock. Door kicked open with his boot. Empty. Cell after cell. Building after building. Every door breached according to plan. Every room searched systematically. No prisoners. Meadows received reports over his tactical radio. Negative items. Negative items. Military terminology meaning no prisoners found. He double-checked personally. He moved through the compound himself, verifying each building his team had cleared. The reports were consistent across all team elements. The compound contained North Vietnamese guards. The compound contained prison facilities with cells and security infrastructure. The compound contained everything except American prisoners of war. While Blue Boy searched the empty prison, Redwine established the outer defensive perimeter south of the compound. Lieutenant Colonel Sidner's 20-man force landed from their helicopters and immediately encountered North Vietnamese soldiers. The enemy wasn't concentrated at the prison itself. They were dispersed around surrounding buildings and positions. Redwine engaged. M60 machine guns opened fire. North Vietnamese soldiers returned fire with rifles and machine guns. The engagement developed into a sustained firefight as Sidner's force maneuvered to secure blocking positions that would prevent enemy reinforcements from reaching the compound during prisoner extraction. Meanwhile, Greenleaf, Bull Simons commanding 22 Green Berets, assaulted the building 250 yards from the prison that intelligence had identified as the guard barracks. The helicopter insertion went perfectly. The assault team hit the building with overwhelming violence perfected through months of rehearsal. Fragmentation grenades through windows. Automatic weapons fire through doorways. The building was cleared in under 2 minutes using tactics that left no room for organized enemy resistance. Then they discovered the intelligence error. The building wasn't a guard barracks. It was a school. Inside were approximately 100 North Vietnamese soldiers, not prison guards, but a military training unit that happened to be billeted at the location. Intelligence had completely misidentified the target. The firefight became brutal. Close-range combat in confined spaces. The Green Berets used grenades and concentrated automatic weapons fire to suppress and eliminate resistance. The North Vietnamese fought back with rifles and machine guns at ranges measured in feet rather than yards. The engagement lasted approximately 10 minutes, an eternity in close-quarters combat where men die in seconds. Simon's force prevailed through superior firepower, tactical discipline, and the shock effect of their assault. Estimates suggest between 75 and 100 North Vietnamese soldiers were killed in the building assault. The American casualties, 0 killed, minor wounds only. But the sustained gunfire had alerted every North Vietnamese military unit within hearing distance. The operational clock was running. North Vietnamese reinforcements would arrive soon. Back at the prison compound, Meadows received final confirmation through his radio network. No prisoners located. The primary mission objective had failed completely, but extraction had to proceed immediately. North Vietnamese reinforcements were organizing. The assault force had penetrated deep into enemy territory with no possibility of ground reinforcement. Extraction was the only option for survival. The HH-53 extraction helicopters moved into position. The first helicopter descended into the compound, where Banana sat with its rotor blades still idling. Blue Boy loaded aboard the extraction aircraft in under 90 seconds. The helicopter lifted off, rotors straining under the load. Additional helicopters extracted Redwine from the perimeter positions while maintaining suppressive fire against North Vietnamese forces attempting to close on the landing zones. The last helicopter moved to extract Greenleaf from the assault position at the barracks building. The entire extraction sequence proceeded with the same tactical precision as the assault. Each helicopter crew knew their exact pickup point. Each team knew their loading procedures. The complete extraction from first helicopter touchdown to final liftoff took less than 10 minutes. As the helicopters climbed away from Sante, North Vietnamese anti-aircraft artillery opened fire. Tracer rounds arced through darkness. The helicopters evaded through aggressive maneuvering and acceleration. None were hit. The formation turned east, back toward Thailand and safety. Behind them, Sante compound burned. The assault had destroyed guard towers, demolished buildings, and left the prison in ruins. The tactical execution had been flawless. But the prisoners, the entire reason for the operation, weren't there. The helicopters landed at Udorn Royal Thai Air Force Base at approximately 0500 hours. The assault force dismounted. Every man accounted for. One minor injury during the insertion when Banana crash-landed, a broken ankle. Otherwise, no American casualties from combat operations deep inside North Vietnam against defended targets. From a tactical perspective, the operation was a masterpiece. The assault force had penetrated 23 miles into enemy territory, conducted the raid exactly as planned, engaged and destroyed significant enemy forces, and extracted without combat losses. From a strategic perspective, the operation was complete failure. 0 prisoners rescued. The intelligence failure became immediately apparent during post-mission analysis. Subsequent investigation determined that prisoners had been moved from Sante in July, 4 months before the raid. The reason? Flooding. The Songkhon River had overflowed its banks, threatening the prison compound, and North Vietnamese prison authorities had evacuated prisoners to other facilities as a precautionary measure. The most recent reconnaissance imagery reviewed 3 days before launch. The photographs showing reduced activity had been accurate. The compound was largely abandoned. But intelligence analysts had dismissed the possibility of complete prisoner evacuation, interpreting reduced activity as operational security measures rather than facility abandonment. The immediate aftermath was controversy. Congressional committees questioned whether the raid had been worth the risk. Military investigators examined why reconnaissance hadn't detected the prisoner evacuation. Intelligence agencies defended their assessments while acknowledging the fundamental failure. But the longer-term strategic consequences proved unexpectedly positive in ways no one anticipated. North Vietnamese military leadership reacted to the Sante raid with genuine alarm. American forces had penetrated 23 miles into North Vietnam, conducted a ground assault against a defended facility, engaged and destroyed a significant enemy force, and extracted intact without losses. The operational capability demonstrated by the raid forced North Vietnamese military planners to fundamentally reconsider their assessment of American special operations capabilities. Within weeks, North Vietnamese prison authorities consolidated prisoners from dispersed camps scattered across the country into larger, more defensible facilities concentrated near Hanoi. The consolidation actually improved prisoner treatment conditions. Larger consolidated camps had better medical facilities, more organized command structures, and were subject to greater international scrutiny than small dispersed camps had been. American prisoners of war, learning through various channels about the rescue attempt, experienced significant morale improvement despite the raid's failure. The knowledge that their country would attempt high-risk operations to rescue them created psychological resilience in desperate circumstances. The Sante raid demonstrated national commitment in a way that political statements and diplomatic negotiations never could. Additionally, the raid profoundly influenced American military doctrine regarding Joint Special Operations Command structures. Operation Ivory Coast had been conducted under direct Joint Chiefs of Staff supervision. One of the first times this operational command structure had been tested for a major ground combat mission. The planning process, coordination between Air Force and Army elements, and command and control procedures created institutional templates that would eventually evolve into United States Special Operations Command decades later. Bull Simons received the Distinguished Service Cross. Assault Force members received Silver Stars and Bronze Stars. Aircrew members received Distinguished Flying Crosses. The military awards recognized not the mission outcome, but the extraordinary execution under extreme circumstances. For the men who conducted the raid, the outcome carried profound psychological weight that military decorations couldn't address. They had trained for 6 months. They had rehearsed the assault 170 times until movements became instinctive. They had flown deep into enemy territory with full knowledge that no reinforcements could reach them if operations went wrong. They had executed the mission with absolute tactical precision. And they had rescued no one. Captain Meadows, interviewed years later by military historians, described the moment of realization inside the compound. Breaching door after door, cell after cell, every building systematically cleared. The slow, crushing recognition that the entire mission, all the planning, all the training, all the risk, had been for nothing. Lieutenant Colonel Zinder, the pilot who deliberately crash-landed Banana inside the compound, described the flight home to Thailand. Every man in the helicopter silent. The psychological weight of failure settling over them despite the tactical success. Warriors measure themselves by mission accomplishment. The Sante raid had accomplished everything except its fundamental purpose. Bull Simons addressed the assault force after they returned to Eglin Air Force Base for debriefing. He told them they had executed the mission with perfection that few military operations in history could match. He told them the intelligence failure wasn't their responsibility. He told them their skill and courage had been extraordinary. But the weight remained. Years later, military historians and special operations analysts would describe the Sante raid as a paradox that defied simple categorization. The most perfectly executed special operations mission in American military history. The most complete intelligence failure. Success and failure occupying the same operational space simultaneously. The lessons influenced special operations planning for decades afterward. The critical importance of multiple independent intelligence sources. The absolute necessity of continuous reconnaissance maintained until actual mission launch. The requirement for flexible mission planning that could adapt to dramatically changed circumstances even after insertion into hostile territory. But the fundamental lesson remained simpler and more brutal than any tactical or intelligence doctrine. Even perfect execution cannot overcome fundamentally flawed intelligence. Even extraordinary courage and skill cannot rescue prisoners who aren't there. Even the most meticulously planned operation can achieve everything except what matters most. The Sante prison compound still exists in North Vietnam. Modern satellite imagery shows the abandoned facility, the destroyed buildings never rebuilt, the overgrown perimeter. It stands as an unintentional memorial to an operation that succeeded in every measurable way except the one that counted. 56 men flew into North Vietnam that night in November 1970. 56 men came home to Thailand. They brought back photographs of an empty prison, after-action reports documenting perfect tactical execution, and the permanent psychological weight of knowing they had done everything right and achieved nothing that mattered. The American prisoners they came to rescue remained in North Vietnamese captivity until the Paris Peace Accords finally secured their release in 1973, more than 2 years after the raid. Some of those former prisoners would later meet the men who had tried to rescue them from Sante. The conversations were brief. The gratitude was genuine and deeply felt. The weight of the empty compound remained forever. If you've ever wondered what happens when 6 American soldiers walk directly into an enemy army 30,000 strong, you need to hear this story. Because on Thanksgiving Day, 1968, that's exactly what happened. And somehow, every single one of them walked back out alive. But 6 months earlier, another team with the same name inserted into the same region. Within minutes of landing, they vanished without a trace. No bodies, no survivors, just silence. 2 missions. 2 completely different outcomes. What made the difference between total annihilation and miraculous survival? The answer will surprise you. At 10:24 on the morning of May 20th, 1968, Sergeant First Class Glenn Oliver Lane climbed aboard a South Vietnamese H-34 Sikorsky helicopter at Forward Operating Base 1 in Phu Bai, Vietnam. 32 years old, Korean War veteran. Lane was what they called a 1-0 in the Studies and Observations Group, the classified deep reconnaissance unit that ran the most dangerous missions of the Vietnam War. He'd survived multiple insertions into Laos. He knew the rules: stay invisible, move silent, avoid contact at all costs. Sitting beside him was Staff Sergeant Robert Duval Owen, 26 years old, from North Carolina. 19 days earlier, on May 1st, Owen had been home on leave. He'd held his daughter Robin, kissed her goodbye, made her a promise. "I'll be back for your birthday." That's a promise. Robin's birthday was May 19th, 1969. Owen would never see it. 4 South Vietnamese fighters completed Spike Team Idaho. 6 men total. Their mission: insert into Target Oscar 8 in eastern Laos, 25 miles northwest of the A Shau Valley. Locate and report North Vietnamese Army activity. Extract before being discovered. The A Shau Valley had earned its reputation in blood. 3 Green Beret camps overrun since '65. The North Vietnamese controlled this region absolutely. Intelligence estimated 45,000 to 50,000 enemy troops in the area. Not guerrillas. Regular army divisions with artillery, anti-aircraft batteries, organized command structures. The King B helicopter, piloted by South Vietnamese airmen from the 219th Special Operations Squadron, descended toward the landing zone. These pilots were fearless. They flew missions American helicopter crews refused. The aircraft touched down. St. Idaho moved fast. 6 men into the jungle. The helicopter climbed away immediately, rotors churning, engine screaming. The sound echoed through the valley. Every enemy soldier within 5 kilometers heard it. Lane established radio contact with Covey, the forward air controller orbiting overhead in an O2 Skymaster. The team reported successful insertion. They began moving northwest, away from the landing zone. Standard procedure: never stay at your insertion point. The enemy hears helicopters. They investigate. Distance equals survival. The team moved carefully through mountainous terrain. Thick jungle, dense vegetation. Movement was slow, but slow meant careful. Slow meant quiet. Slow meant alive. At 10:54, Lane keyed his radio one final time. His voice was barely a whisper. The kind of whisper that means the enemy is so close you can hear them breathing. NBA all around us. Cannot talk. Silence. That was the last transmission anyone ever heard from Spike Team Idaho. Back at Forward Operating Base 1, radio operators waited for the next scheduled check-in. Noon. Nothing. 1400 hours. Silence. 1600 hours. Still nothing. Staff Sergeant Robert J. Spider Parks was in the team room when word spread. Spider had run multiple missions with Lane. They'd trusted each other with their lives in denied territory. Lane had recently recommended Spider for promotion to lead another team. The recommendation went through. Spider was no longer assigned to St. Idaho, but his brothers were. Radio silence meant one of 3 things. The team was evading enemy forces and couldn't risk transmission. They were surrounded, fighting for survival. Or they were already dead. By nightfall, the operations center made the decision. Launch a bright light mission. Bright light, the most dangerous operation type in the Studies and Observations Group. Combat search and rescue for compromised teams. Casualty rates exceeded 70%. Teams went in carrying 30 rifle magazines instead of 20. Extra grenades. Extra medical supplies. 1 canteen of water. No food. Because everyone knew the North Vietnamese would be waiting. The fundamental promise was simple. If you go down, we come for you. No matter the odds. No matter the cost. Spike Team Oregon drew the mission. Veterans Mike Tucker and George Sternberg would insert into the same landing zone St. Idaho used. Search for survivors. Recover remains if possible. The briefing was blunt. Expect heavy contact. Expect casualties. Prepare for the worst. St. Oregon launched the morning of May 21st. The instant their helicopter approached the landing zone, the jungle erupted. AK-47 fire ripped through aluminum skin. RPG rockets streaked past. One missed by 10 feet. A direct hit would have vaporized everyone aboard. The team hit the ground running. Spread out. Weapons up. Began searching. They found evidence immediately. Boot prints. Disturbed vegetation. 50 meters from insertion, they discovered expended shell casings. American 5.56 mm brass from CAR-15 rifles. Multiple magazines scattered across 20 meters. Someone had fought here. Desperately. Then they found American grenades. M26 fragmentation grenades lying on the ground. Unused. Captured. The North Vietnamese had stripped them from dead Americans. St. Idaho had been overrun so fast they never radioed for help. Never employed all their weapons. The ambush was immediate. Overwhelming. Absolute. The attack came without warning. Company-sized force. 120 soldiers. Automatic weapons from north and south. RPG rockets from the east. Grenades from the west. Completely surrounded. Tucker screamed into his radio. Prairie fire. Prairie fire. Emergency code. Troops in heavy contact. Need immediate extraction. The team fought backwards toward the landing zone. Fire and movement. One man shoots while another runs. Grenades to break contact. The jungle too thick to see 30 feet. Muzzle flashes everywhere. Bullets snapping past heads. One American killed. Sniper round through the skull. Dead instantly. Multiple wounded. Tucker took shrapnel in the leg. Sternberg's shoulder grazed by a bullet. They kept moving. Stopping meant dying. The helicopters descended through a storm of fire. Door gunners unleashed their M60s. Thousands of rounds into the jungle. St. Oregon threw themselves aboard. Rounds impacting metal. The distinctive ping-ping-ping of bullets hitting aircraft. They made it. One dead. Multiple wounded. Mission failed. No bodies recovered. No survivors found. Just spent brass and captured equipment and the terrible certainty that St. Idaho was gone. The search was terminated. Glenn Lane and Robert Owen were listed missing in action. 4 South Vietnamese fighters also listed MIA. No remains. No closure. Robin Owen never saw her father again. She grew up without him. Grew old without knowing how he died. Without remains to bury. Just a name on a wall in Washington, D.C. Panel 26 East. Line 115. Staff Sergeant Robert Duval Owen. Missing in action. If you're finding this story as powerful as we did, hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories like this. And subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Vietnam. John Stryker Meyer stepped off the same H-34 helicopter that carried St. Idaho to their deaths. 21 years old. Fresh from Special Forces training. He passed the 6-man team boarding the aircraft. Didn't think much about it. Just another mission. 3 days later, he learned the truth. The team he'd passed was gone. Vanished. Presumed dead. Spider Parks was devastated. Meyer watched his friend process the loss. These weren't statistics. These were brothers. Men who'd saved Spider's life. Who'd shared rations and pulled security and trusted each other absolutely. Now they were ghosts. Meyer couldn't stop thinking. If a veteran with Lane's experience could be erased in minutes, what chance did a rookie have? But Meyer had volunteered. Everyone in the studies and observations group volunteered. You raised your hand knowing the casualty rates exceeded 50% in some areas. You said yes knowing men like Lane vanished without trace. You went anyway. Spider became the new 1-0 for Spike Team Idaho. Don Wolken became 1-1. Meyer became 1-2, radio operator. Nguyen Van Sao became the indigenous team leader. Sao was a quiet farmer from the Central Highlands. 3 years running cross-border missions. He'd seen what the communists did to villages that refused to cooperate. Executions. Forced labor. Entire families disappeared. Sao chose to fight. And he was exceptional at it. The reconstituted team trained relentlessly. Night ambushes around Phu Bai. Daytime patrols. Weapons drills until reactions became automatic. Learning each other's rhythms. Building trust. Because trust wasn't optional. Trust was survival. When your point man signals danger, you freeze. No questions. No hesitation. When your indigenous teammates say the enemy is near, you believe them. They've been fighting this war longer than you. They know the terrain. They know how to survive. By November 68, Meyer had been promoted to 1-0. Team leader, 22 years old. Multiple successful missions. He was ready. As ready as anyone could be. On Thanksgiving Day, 1968, American intelligence discovered a problem. 3 North Vietnamese divisions had vanished. 1st Division, 3rd Division, 7th Division, 30,000 troops. Gone. These weren't estimates. These were confirmed formations tracked by signals intelligence. They disappeared near the Cambodian border. If those divisions were massing for an offensive on Saigon, commanders needed to know. Immediately, Spike Team Idaho drew the mission. 6 men. Meyer is 1-0. John Bubba Shore is 1-1. Sao, Heap, Phuc, and Tuan, the indigenous fighters. All veterans. Mission, find the divisions. Report location. Extract. The problem was Cambodia. Different rules. Teams could penetrate only 12 kilometers into Cambodian territory. No fixed-wing air support if attacked. No F-4 Phantoms. No A-1 Sky Raiders. The State Department demanded plausible deniability. What they did have were the Green Hornets. Air Force 20th Special Operations Squadron. UH-1P Hueys. Better armed than standard Army birds. M60 machine guns. M134 miniguns capable of 6,000 rounds per minute. 75mm rockets. If things went wrong, the Green Hornets would come. That morning, ST Idaho waited at DOP Special Forces Camp. Remote firebase on the Cambodian border. Surrounded by jungle. A helicopter arrived carrying unexpected cargo. Thanksgiving dinner. Hot turkey. Gravy. Mashed potatoes. Cranberry rolls. The mess sergeant had somehow arranged a proper meal for this forgotten outpost. The team ate. Meyer figured if you're having a last meal, Thanksgiving dinner wasn't bad. For 20 minutes, they weren't Green Berets heading into denied territory. They were just Americans eating holiday dinner. Then the Hueys arrived. ST Idaho loaded aboard. The moment ended. Back to war. The helicopters turned west toward Cambodia. The border was invisible from the air. Just jungle. But everyone knew when they crossed it. You felt it. The weight of operating where extraction would be difficult. Where air support was limited. You were on your own. The insertion was fast and low. Treetop level. Full speed. Pilots weaving between trees. Making it hard for anti-aircraft gunners. The helicopters descended and flared hard. ST Idaho jumped. Hit ground. Started moving. The helicopters climbed away. Rotors fading. Silence returned. Meyer looked around. Something was wrong. In Laos, they operated in double canopy jungle. Dense vegetation. Limited visibility. Here the terrain was open. Thin forest. Scattered trees. Meyer could see sunlight. Could see 100 yards through the trees. Bad. Open terrain meant easy detection. Meant the enemy could spot them from distance. Meant nowhere to hide if compromised. Meyer had Phuc and Bubba prepare claymore mines with 5-second fuses. Normally claymores used 60-second fuses or command detonation. But if they had to run, they'd drop claymores behind them. 5 seconds gave just enough time to clear the blast. Just enough time before 700 steel balls turned the trail into a kill zone. The team moved carefully. Sao took point. Meyer trusted Sao absolutely. The Vietnamese fighter could sense enemy presence. He knew how they moved, how they operated, how they thought. If Sao said danger was near, it was near. No debate. After 20 minutes, Sao spotted smoke. Thin gray drifting through trees. He signaled. Raised fist. Everyone froze. Meyer moved forward. Weapon up. Dying campfire. Warm ashes. Boot prints in soft earth. Discarded ration tins. A company-sized unit had bivouacked here within hours. But it was empty now. The question was where they'd gone. And when. Meyer started photographing. The Minix spy camera every team carried. Intelligence would want documentation. Click, click, click. Evidence of enemy presence. Sao was getting nervous. His eyes widening. Speech getting faster. Meyer had learned to read these signs. Indigenous fighters communicated danger through body language. When Sao was relaxed, he moved smoothly. When danger approached, his movements became jerky. Eyes darting. Breathing quick. Right now, Sao was screaming danger without words. Heap, the interpreter, moved closer to Meyer. Whispered. Sao says we should leave. Now. Meyer suggested moving west. Maybe find a supply cache. More intelligence value. Sao grabbed Meyer's arm, looked directly into his eyes. His broken English was clear enough. Call helicopters now. Beaucoup en vie come now. Beaucoup. French for many. The indigenous fighters used it constantly. It meant overwhelming numbers. It meant run. Meyer couldn't hear anything. Couldn't see enemy soldiers. The jungle was quiet. Birds singing. No sounds of movement. But Sao was insistent. Eyes wide. Hands shaking. Meyer had learned one fundamental lesson about indigenous fighters. When they tell you danger is coming, you believe them. Their survival instincts were honed by years of warfare. They sensed things Americans couldn't. Meyer keyed his radio. Called for extraction. The helicopters acknowledged. 15 minutes out. 15 minutes might as well have been 15 hours. Fuchs suddenly shouted. Voice carrying pure panic. Beaucoup VC. Beaucoup VC. Meyer turned. Saw pith helmets emerging from jungle. North Vietnamese soldiers. Running. Not patrolling. Running directly at their position. From the south. Maybe 50 visible. Maybe more behind. Sao hissed at Heap. Pointed north. More pith helmets. More soldiers. Also running. Converging from two directions. Meyer understood instantly. St. Idaho had walked into the middle of a division base camp during unit rotation. One element leaving to move south. Another arriving from the north to replace them. Both elements discovering the Americans simultaneously. The timing was catastrophic. The jungle exploded with gunfire. AK-47 rounds snapped past Meyer's head. That distinctive crack of supersonic bullets missing by inches. RPG rockets whooshed overhead. Explosive detonations as they hit trees. Meyer fired his M79 grenade launcher. 2 rounds. High explosive. 40mm grenades tumbling through air. Orange fireballs. Black smoke. Bodies thrown backwards. Bought them 5 seconds. Maybe. He screamed at Bubba. Move. Now. The race for survival began. St. Idaho ran. Full sprint through thin Cambodian forest. No more stealth. Speed was everything. Distance was survival. Behind them, hundreds of North Vietnamese soldiers gave chase. Shooting wildly. Screaming. Officers blowing whistles. Coordinating pursuit. Closing distance. Sao and Meyer stopped. Planted the first claymore behind a tree. 5-second fuse. They pulled the initiator and sprinted. 1, 2, 3, 4. The mine detonated. Blast wave hitting from behind. Physical push. 700 steel balls at 1,200 meters per second, shredding the first rank of pursuers. Screams. The pursuit faltered. For 10 seconds. The enemy kept coming. These weren't conscripts. These were regular army. Disciplined. Organized. They'd taken casualties and kept advancing. Sao placed another claymore. 5-second fuse. They ran. The mine exploded. Backblast so close Meyer felt it slam his back. Heat. Pressure. Shockwave knocking him forward. Still the enemy pursued. Crashing through brush. Shouting. Getting closer. At the landing zone, he planted a claymore facing south. Tripwire. Contact detonator. First soldier to hit the wire would trigger instant detonation. Bubba rigged one facing north. Same setup. The team formed hasty perimeter. Facing outward. Weapons up. Every direction was enemy. Pith helmets moving through trees. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. This was the missing division. 30,000 troops. And St. Idaho was in the center. Meyer could hear the helicopters. That beautiful sound. Distinctive whop 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 of rotor blades. Getting louder. Closer. The first Huey descended through tree canopy. Door gunners opened up with M60s. Suppressive fire into surrounding jungle. Tracers arcing into vegetation. Every 5th round a tracer, so gunners could see where fire was going. The minigun spun up. That unmistakable buzzsaw sound. 6,000 rounds per minute. Solid stream of lead. Trees disintegrated. Vegetation shredded. Anything in the path died. NVA soldiers emerged from smoke. Dozens running toward the landing zone. One final assault before the Americans escaped. If they reached the landing zone before extraction, they'd win. They'd kill or capture 6 Americans. Propaganda victory worth the casualties. Heap detonated his claymore. Mine exploded directly in front of advancing soldiers. 700 steel balls. Front rank disappeared. Bodies flew backwards. Limbs separated. The assault faltered. More soldiers burst from the north. Tripped Bubba's contact mine. Explosion tore through formation. More casualties. More screaming. But they kept coming. Officers driving them forward. Whistles blowing. Commands shouted. You had to respect that. Soldiers advancing despite knowing they were running into machine gun fire and mines. That took courage. Even if they were trying to kill you. The Huey was on the ground. Rotors turning. Door gunners firing. Minigun barrels glowing red. Overheating. But the gunner kept firing. St. Idaho scrambled aboard. South first. Then Heap. Then Fook and Tuan. Then Bubba. Meyer was last. As he grabbed the skid to pull himself up, he detonated the final claymore. Remote detonation. Blast wave caught the next wave of soldiers. Bodies tumbled. The assault broke. The Huey lifted off. Climbed rapidly. Maximum power. Turbine screaming. Below, more soldiers burst from jungle. Too late. The helicopters were gaining altitude. Out of effective range. A few bullets pinged off aircraft. Nothing critical. They were going to make it. One soldier, braver or more desperate than the rest, broke through the hail of fire. He sprinted across open ground. Bullets kicking up dirt around him. Somehow not hit. He reached the landing zone edge. Maybe 10 feet from the helicopter. AK-47 at port arms. Trying to bring weapon up. Trying to get one shot off. Meyer and the door gunner fired simultaneously. 2 M16s on full automatic. Burst caught the soldier in the chest. Impact was so sudden his head and feet continued moving forward while his torso drove backwards. Physics. Momentum. He collapsed as the helicopter climbed away. Meyer threw one final white phosphorus grenade. Tumbled through air. White smoke trailing. Detonated among soldiers flooding the landing zone. White phosphorus burned at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Would burn through metal. Through bone. Through anything. You couldn't put it out. It was a horrible weapon. But this was a horrible war. Minutes later, St. Idaho landed at DOP Special Forces Camp. They'd been in Cambodia less than 2 hours. From insertion to extraction. 2 hours. They'd located the missing North Vietnamese divisions. Photographed the base camp. Survived contact with thousands of enemy soldiers. And everyone was alive. Not a scratch. Not a single casualty. 6 men had walked into 30,000 enemy soldiers and walked back out. The first thing they did was go to the mess hall. Second Thanksgiving dinner. They were starving. Adrenaline crash hitting hard. Hands shaking. Legs weak. The body's response to sustained fear and physical exertion. Halfway through the meal, the officer who'd sent them tracked them down. Wanted full debrief. Wanted them to join him for third Thanksgiving dinner while they discussed what they'd seen. 3 Thanksgiving dinners in one day. That had to be some kind of record. They explained what they'd found. The base camp. Unit rotation. Division-sized force. The officer listened. Took notes. Asked questions. The intelligence was critical. Exactly what headquarters needed. Meyer would later write about the mission. We had been moments away from a very violent death, and we killed an untold number of NVA soldiers. Soldiers who continued to earn our undying respect. I took no pleasure in killing the enemy. It was simply us or them. You didn't hate the enemy. You respected them. They were soldiers doing their job just like you. The fact you were trying to kill each other didn't change that fundamental respect. The Thanksgiving mission became legendary. 6 men against 30,000. 2 hours of running combat. 0 American casualties. Mission accomplished. But the contrast between the 2 St. Idaho missions haunted everyone who knew the stories. In May, a veteran team with an experienced 1-0 vanished without trace. 6 men. Gone. Within minutes of insertion. In November, a reconstituted team with a rookie 1-0 walked into the exact same scenario, surrounded by overwhelming enemy forces, and escaped intact. What made the difference? Some would say training. Meyer's team had trained extensively. They knew each other's movements. They trusted each other absolutely. Some would say luck. The timing of extraction helicopters. Placement of claymores. The fact no one took a bullet during the running firefight. Some would say air support. The Green Hornets' devastating firepower stemmed the assault long enough for extraction. But Meyer knew the real answer. Trust. Blind, absolute trust in the men standing next to you. When Sal said the NVA were coming, Meyer believed him instantly. No hesitation. No second guessing. That trust bought them 15 seconds to start running before the enemy arrived in force. Those 15 seconds made the difference between life and death. When Fook shouted warning, the entire team reacted as one. No confusion. No debate. Everyone knew their role. Everyone executed flawlessly. Training made reactions automatic. Eliminated delay between seeing danger and responding to it. The indigenous fighters weren't subordinates. They weren't assets. They were teammates, partners, brothers. They'd been fighting the North Vietnamese longer than any American. They knew the terrain. They knew the enemy. They knew how to survive. Meyer trusted them, and that trust was reciprocated. Sao trusted Meyer to listen when he said danger was coming. Heap trusted Meyer to get them out. The indigenous fighters trusted the Americans to call helicopters and coordinate extraction. That mutual trust created a team that functioned as a single organism. No wasted motion. No wasted words. Everyone doing their job. Everyone covering each other. That's what made these teams effective. Not superior firepower. Not better equipment. Trust. The absolute certainty that the man next to you would do his job, would cover your back, would die before leaving you behind. Meyer would run missions for another year and a half. Return to the United States in April '69. Complete college at University of Minnesota. Work as journalist for decades. Eventually write multiple books about these operations. Across the Fence. SOG Chronicles. On the Ground. Preserve the history of the secret war. Give voice to men who'd operated in silence. But he never forgot Glenn Lane and Robert Owen. The men who'd boarded the same helicopter he'd exited on May 20th, '68. The men who'd never come home. Their ghosts haunted Forward Operating Base 1. Their names spoken in whispers. Their loss reminded every team this wasn't a game. This was life and death. And sometimes death won. To this day, Glenn Lane and Robert Owen remain listed as missing in action. Their remains have never been recovered. The Defense POW MIA accounting agency continues searching. Teams travel to Laos. Interview witnesses. Excavate suspected battle locations. They've recovered remains from dozens of aircraft. From hundreds of missing personnel. But not Lane and Owen. Not the 4 South Vietnamese fighters who died with them. The Laotian jungle is vast. Millions of acres. Rugged mountains. Dense vegetation. If Lane and Owen died in the initial ambush, their remains are somewhere in Target Oscar 8. Unmarked. Unknown. Lost to time and terrain. Robin Owen never got to celebrate her birthday with her father. He'd promised to come home. May 1st. His last day of leave. He'd held her. Kissed her goodbye. Made a promise he couldn't keep. She grew up without a father. Grew old without ever knowing exactly how he died. Without remains to bury. Just a name on a wall in Washington, D.C. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Panel 26 East. Line 115. Staff Sergeant Robert Duval Owen. Missing in action. Spider Parks returned to the landing zone where St. Idaho vanished. Twice. Once immediately after the war during recovery operations. Again years later after relations normalized with Laos and Vietnam. He spoke with former North Vietnamese soldiers who'd fought in that area. Tried to find information. Tried to find closure. Asked if anyone remembered May 20th, '68. If anyone remembered a firefight with American soldiers. If anyone knew where bodies might be. Nothing. 40 years of memories. Thousands of battles. Hundreds of American teams. Individual engagements blended together. Or the men who might have known were dead themselves. The jungle swallowed 6 men whole and never gave them back. Approximately 50 Green Berets remain listed as missing in action from these deep reconnaissance operations. More than 80 aviators who supported missions are also unaccounted for. These men disappeared into Laos, Cambodia, and North Vietnam during 8 years of secret war. Their families never received closure. Never got to bury their loved ones. Never got answers to questions that haunted them. How did they die? Did they suffer? Are they still out there somewhere? The contrast between St. Idaho's 2 outcomes tells the story of these operations in miniature. Some teams vanished. Some teams survived against impossible odds. The difference often came down to seconds. To split-second decisions. To trust. To luck. The margin between life and death was razor-thin. A 5-second delay. A helicopter arriving 30 seconds late. A claymore placed 10 feet left instead of right. These tiny margins determined who came home and who didn't. Meyer says it came down to his indigenous teammates. Sao saved his life on Thanksgiving Day. That moment when Sao said the NVA were coming. When Meyer couldn't see or hear anything but trusted Sao anyway. That moment was the difference. If Meyer had ignored Sao. If he'd insisted on continuing patrol. If he'd delayed calling extraction by even 2 minutes. They'd all be dead. ST Idaho would have vanished just like Lane's team. Another radio call cut short. Another team listed missing in action. The lesson applies beyond combat, beyond military operations. Trust the people who have more experience than you. Trust the people who know the terrain. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. And when someone you trust tells you danger is coming, you move. Immediately. No hesitation. No debate. You act. Because that 5 seconds of delay could cost your life. These are the stories that don't make headlines. The classified missions that remained secret for 20 years. The operations where survival depended on skill, training, and blind trust in the men standing next to you. The missions where 6 men faced 30,000 enemy soldiers and lived to tell about it. And the missions where 6 men vanished into the jungle and never came home. If this story moved you the way it moved us, hit that like button. Every single like tells the algorithm to show this story to more people. Stories about warriors who proved themselves against impossible odds. Real people, real heroism, real sacrifice. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories that deserve to be remembered. Stories that honor the men who fought in silence. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. From Alaska to New Zealand. From Scotland to South Africa. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Tell us if this story connected with you. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching.